Welcome, everybody. My name's Licia Heath. I'm CEO of Women for Election. We are a non-partisan, not-for-profit with the mission of inspiring and equipping more women to run for public office in Australia. I'm coming to you today from Gadigal land. Feel free to put in the chat box where you're coming to us today, but I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, past, present and emerging. I'd also like to say that sovereignty of this land was never ceded, and it's my belief that until we reach a treaty with our First Nations people, that our ability to move forward harmoniously together is compromised. So fantastic to see such a strong response for this event today. I'm in the unusual situation of actually being the one being interviewed today by the fabulous Angela Priestley from Women's Agenda. We have a lot to cover. We'll be doing our own Q&A, but we're going to open it up to questions from the audience as well. Ange, thanks for running this co-branded event with us today. Over to you.
Well, thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. It's great to see everyone's faces coming in and a really good group. So we're up for a great conversation and a really important conversation, a conversation that I think really leads to making a difference. The more we can get, we can all see the benefits of female leadership, the more I hope we will see more women running for election, and then we have that real opportunity to shift the status quo and break so many barriers that are there present in the system. So this conversation comes at a time when we've all seen and heard the stories about how countries led by women have managed the pandemic. And we've covered a lot of those stories on Women's Agenda, and they actually do surprisingly, well, I shouldn't say surprisingly because you think it should be obvious, but surprisingly well on our site. It might be that urge to see some positive content out there. So people are reading that sort of content, people are seeing it, and it's not just on Women's Agenda that we hear how people are analysing the approach that women are taking to managing the pandemic. You see that across the mainstream media as well. It's been a real topic of conversation. So, we know the obvious ones like Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, Angela Merkel in Germany, Tsai Ing-wen in Taiwan. So we're starting to learn and hear about the remarkable job women are doing in these places at a time when just 10% of world leaders are female. And another one I want to highlight there are the key Nordic countries. And you see how 4, Finland, Denmark, Norway and Iceland are led by women. And the 5th one of those core Nordic countries happens to be led by a man, and is Sweden. And we all know the stories of the let it rip approach that has occurred there and what's happened with their COVID numbers. So these female leaders, I think from this year, we're already seeing so much being done to analyse just what they're doing differently and why. And it could be that, maybe it's that they do have to work so much harder to break glass ceilings to get to where they are. Maybe it is that they happen to be leading more liberal led governments in the first place. We don't know. And I think there's so much to unpack there as to why they're doing this. But what we see is that they are making hard and difficult choices to protect as many people as possible. And they were making those decisions early, particularly around lockdowns. They were making those lockdown decisions early, and they're hard things to come out and say. They're often disliked decisions. They're uncomfortable decisions. Now, in terms of the recovery, I'm also seeing how female leaders are promising a green recovery, and they're looking to stimulus to support renewable energy packages. They're looking at creating green jobs. And I've seen how they're using communication to their advantage as well. We see Angela Merkel gave open, honest and difficult press conferences and continues to do so. Jacinda Ardern, during their hard lockdown period, she kept in contact constantly, doing these webinar series from her living room where she'd actually go and interview various experts, like parenting experts, to talk about how they can give advice for how to parent during that lockdown period, which I thought was fascinating to watch. So all things to unpack today, but I think overall it really shouldn't take a pandemic to realise an historically different approach to leadership could actually be a good idea. And we know that Women for Election was running well before this crisis. You had your first conference back in 2017. You already know these things. You already know how important it is to get women elected, women running for election, and how vital women in leadership and in politics will be for, and I always call it this, the critical decade that we have ahead now on so many key issues that are really make or break for us. So Lucia, I guess over to you, but leaving aside the pandemic for a while, let's just start with, why do we need to urgently change the numbers on women running for election? Maybe just to go through the purpose of your work and what you're doing at the moment.
Yeah, why do we need to change the number of women running? I think the simple answer is the more women we have running, the more women will get elected. Mm-hmm. The more complex thing to understand there is, if you look at an Australian context, then at least at the federal level, more women have been running over the last half a dozen federal elections. So each federal election, more and more women have been running. But the commensurate number of women getting elected is not there. And that's interesting. And that's because of largely because of the barriers, the increased barriers women face when they do run for office. And that's exactly what our organisation tries to address in terms of the training workshops and the education pieces that we do. But, the bigger, more umbrella question, why do we want more women in our legislative chambers? Well, COVID's been a great kind of proof statement, but it's about what that that more diverse lived experience brings to our legislative chambers. So, and there's been umpteen numbers of reports about what, more women in politics, what the benefits it brings, but it's from smaller things like women are more visible in their electorates, women take more constituent meetings, people feel more represented when they have a female MP, women tend to take the issues that their constituents have brought to them to the legislative chamber, and policy change tends to come out of that, and the breadth of policies tend to be that much wider. Women tend to be focusing more on education and healthcare and welfare and sustainability and environmental issues and aged care. It goes on, and that's because their experience of all those sectors brings with it a sense of what needs to change and how things can be improved. So let's not even focus on the fact that more women in politics and things like that tends to bring down corruption, decreases wars. There's all that element as well.
There is all that, and there's the evidence there. There's data there to show that. So yeah.
So there's many reasons why we want more women and in our legislative chambers, and Australia's been going backwards. That's the big problem. Australia's going backwards versus our comparable nations in the OECD, and that's a big problem, and that's why we're here to address it.
Okay, so let's talk about some of those challenges that you feel are coming up. And I'm curious to see because listen, we had a conversation, we were on a roundtable probably about a year ago talking about how to get more. It was about basically shifting the status quo to get more women elected. And I feel like that, it obviously it feels like a lifetime ago. And I wonder how people kind of perceive the challenges that are there now, if you think that's shifting at all, because the challenges are there. I remember clearly one of those challenges being around the fact that our current parliament just isn't set up to have a family. Like that's just an obvious one. It doesn't work if you've got young kids. It's really, really tough to go and be spending weeks in Canberra. And you made the point, well, that's in federal politics. There's obviously heaps of other places you can start where you can actually stay in your community and actually it's a great time to have a job at a more local level in that. But when I think about also, we keep talking about we need to change parliament, we need to change the structures so that it's easier to enter parliament regardless of what you've got going on in your life. And now I'm kind of at the point where we can't obviously wait for that to change. We've also seen how quickly things can change when we desperately need them to change. So do you think it's a matter of, do you feel like that sort of barrier is still sitting there? Are people still concerned about the fact that this isn't so conducive to a flexible work? This isn't great for a family if you're at the point of having young kids or something. Are the challenges or the perceived obstacles that stand in the way, are they shifting as a result of COVID, as a result potentially of even more frustration at what's going on?
Yeah, I think, there's a lot in that. I think the barriers are still there in terms of you still need cash to run. There's still the candidate selection in the major parties has largely not changed. A lot of the barriers that we talk about. But one of the absolutely critical elements that has changed is that people are paying attention now, particularly women. So if I go back to when we ran our first ever conference in 2017 and we were still trying to fill seats, the day before, now our events are sold out and we have waiting lists. Like that's in a very short space of time, and nothing has changed in our political landscape in that time in terms of what some of the rubbish that we've witnessed. It's the same stuff that was happening 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. It's just the public's onto it now, and they've got their head up and they're watching and they're not okay with it. And what we've witnessed is how women are mobilising. The bushfires were a very big part of that. The start of this year, who knew we were going to roll into a global pandemic out the back of that? And I certainly don't want to underplay the increased burden that's on women in this country and other countries. But what's fascinating is, despite that burden, women are rolling up their sleeves and saying, how do I get involved? Because I am done with the status quo. And one of the wonderful quotes I heard a few months back, and I can't remember who said it, but when you look at women's movements over the last centuries, when the suffragette movement happened, or when women have hit the streets, or when women have started running, like in the US in the women's wave, those movements happen when women have made the realization that nobody else is going to make the change.
Yeah.
And that is what is happening in Australia right now. We've been looking, saying, are you going to do this? Are you going to take care of this? Are you going to make this policy change? Are you going to? Are you going to? All right, if you're not going to, I will. I'm going to get involved and I'll do it.
Yeah, exactly. Not only are you going to make this policy change, but even as we see some of the recovery efforts, and unfortunately they're not so supportive of women's workforce participation at all. And I'm looking at a few key examples there, where I feel that's may encourage more women. We published a feature piece by Christina Zwicker recently that asked if we're about to witness this full women's wave of women running for election, particularly. And she used the anecdote originally was looking at the childcare response that should have women storming to the pre-selection office to get heard on that. And then other elements like the blokecovery that we're seeing, which is how we've put it a number of times when we see certain stimulus measures put out there to favour male-dominated industries as opposed to female-dominated industries. So that level of frustration, I think it's really interesting to watch with all this. I guess when you mention, some of the really, terrible behaviour that you see, looking at, sexism, particularly, you mentioned 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I can't help but note a really crappy example of it in the last month or so. And this is the kind of stuff I just think, surely some of these male politicians see how they're going to get, what's going to be said about them on Twitter, how open it is on social media, how we'll instantly share the video, and you're going to look like a bit of a dinosaur when it comes out that you said this stuff in Parliament. But a key example I thought was recently Brad Hazzard's attack on New South Wales opposition leader Jodie Mackay. And one of the things that is interesting to see there is how Jodie put that video out sort of within a few hours on social media. And this is what's really interesting to see from women currently in office, how they're calling out this behaviour immediately, and they're getting the support when they do so as well. And they're getting cross-party support when they do so. I thought that was a great example. So do you think where do you think it's going in terms of this sexist rubbish that we're seeing? When is it going? Do you think that we're at a tipping point where surely people have to wake up, it's going to end?
I think, yes. And this is part of it's in the light now. It used to be in the shadow. and it's in the light now, and only that can only benefit the change that we need. I think there's been too many examples in the past where that kind of bullying behaviour has been rewarded in many ways, and you'd be surprised to know then it gets repeated. But that is coming to an end now. The uproar that happens, we have a greater idea of how gender is played out in the media, in terms of reporting and what Julia Gillard went through, and she's done a fabulous job, even as recently as the last 6 weeks, coming out and talking about her book and understanding how female leadership has a different lens put on it. And it's been so subconscious for so many people, men and women, and it's very conscious now. And when that change happens, so comes the behaviour change, including women wanting to get involved in the political landscape. And we don't gild the lily at all in terms of the workshops that we run and talking about, well, it's all, it's always good all the time. Julia Gillard said, be aware, not beware. Like, that is a big difference. But that alignment of interest is one of the things that's getting the public back involved in the democratic process. So when I'm talking about alignment of interest, how you can conduct yourself in your work, how I can conduct myself in my work, how my brother can conduct himself in his work, doesn't seem to align with how parliamentarians and MPs can conduct themselves in work. Now that time is over. But it's it's not over. It's coming to an end. There is still a way to go. But one good way to make that less of a bear pit is to reduce the number of bears. And again, the policy changes that can come when you have more women in those chambers that not only say this is not acceptable anymore, but we're going to put things like recourse in place to ensure that it doesn't happen anymore. I think that's really important.
And I think there's also that note about shifting the numbers. And we see this study with women on boards, particularly, where it's having one woman on a board doesn't make a huge amount of difference. Having two, not so much. Having three is the tipping point, and it gets better from there. Ideally, you want to get to the 40%. And I feel like, that's got to be the same in politics as well. And I can't help but think about how we see some of this play out in the Liberal Party, particularly the Federal Liberal Party, where things are not necessarily called out when women are in office, and they probably can't, and I can completely understand that. And in a sense, I see that also with, I don't believe we're getting a lot from the Morrison government in terms of what's happening for, say, women's jobs creation. We've seen a little bits and pieces of that, but not a huge amount. But I also think that there's just not enough women in there in the first place to enable women to kind of make sure that those issues get heard and get where they need to get positioned so that it can make a difference. Do you have any ideas, or what do you think is the tipping point? Does it need to get to 50-50? What are we looking at here before we can actually see that getting more women elected actually starts to really make a difference in the conversations that are getting heard and getting the airplay that they need?
Yeah, I think, well, we're 51% of the population here, and we're 30% of our parliamentarians. So yes, 40% is often stated in the literature as that tipping point between then being self-fulfilling and being able to actually implement on policy. Now that 30% is so divided currently in terms of, nearly 50% in the ALP and 19% in the LNP, and the LNP federally isn't in power. And when you have so few women, by nature, you can only have a reduced number of women in then the cabinet, assistant cabinet, expenditure review committee that has no women on it at all. So it's critically important is those leadership elements at the top of the parties who are making the decisions. And the lack of lived experience there. Let's not just talk about women, let's talk about a broad diversity of people there. If you have 5 people on an expenditure review committee that are all men, white men, Anglo-Saxon men between the age of 45 and 55, that have all sent their kids to private school, that have never filled in a BAS statement, that have never queued for Centrelink, have never had to search for aged care for their parents, then you get very homogenous responses to policy scenarios. And that is problematic for our community at large. You talked about climate change before. All the research that shows those countries that have the most ambitious climate reforms right now are those that have large numbers of women, 50% or thereabouts, in their legislative chambers. It's not a coincidence. So the tipping point, yes, we want to get to 40%, but, and we're doing a piece at the moment about the different states, and some have ministries that are 50% women, maybe even 55% women. And in the NT, that's been the case for some time. Same in the ACT, it's down there in Victoria. New South Wales, no. Federally, no. Long way from it. Biggest economy in Australia, New South Wales, and overseeing us federally, which has the biggest impact. So let's shift that together, and we start by getting more women elected in the first place.
Yeah. So 50%. Okay, we are for it. Licia, could you maybe, given I know that there's probably plenty of people in this group here listening today who have been tuning into your regular weekly sessions, which are so awesome to see that you're doing that. But maybe can I ask about the tipping point, I guess, for you, or what happened with you when you decided to run for Wentworth? What was it for you? Was it just some frustration? What led you to go, yeah, I'm going to throw my hat in the ring and I'm going to go for this?
Yeah, all of the things. Look, I was increasingly frustrated with watching the shenanigans of our federal politicians in particular, and just, again, the alignment of interests, how you could behave there versus how you could behave anywhere else in any workplace around the country. When that happened, when I was in Wentworth, the member happened to be our Prime Minister. He got a bullet put in him from his party, and I just couldn't fathom the idea that the outcome of that was likely to be a Liberal candidate and a Labor candidate talking about things that weren't relevant to me, my community, and I thought broadly the country, that they were going to start talking about jobs and growth and stability in leadership, and they weren't going to talk. In fact, they would actively choose not to talk about things that were big issues to me, like education funding, asylum seekers, climate change, federal ICAC. So I decided to get involved and be that really annoying person on the dais with them that made them talk about those things. I knew I wasn't going to win, but there's lots of definitions of success, and success for me was that the ultimate winner, Karen Phelps, ended up adopting a lot of my policies, and that's a massive win. So what would have happened if others didn't get involved in that debate? I want everyone to think about that for a second. What would happen if other people didn't involve themselves in that platform at that time? And that's why we need to get involved in it. It's not always to win, but it's to make those that potentially will win more more, answerable to their constituents, and talk about policies that are important to the community.
Yeah. So you did that as an independent, and Karen Phelps again as an independent. How? I mean, this is where it gets complex. And I think Peter has left a comment here saying that, you know, you often you come up against people who've kind of been in these party machines since they were 20, and they've been doing this for years, decades, kind of just sitting there waiting for their turn to get their time when they get to run for probably get pre-selected to a safe seat, and they're in, and they don't have the past career, they don't have the past experience. I guess as frustrated women looking to have a say, and that's a great point about that idea of get on the dice and make these the people who aren't, even if you never think that you're going to win, you have that opportunity to have the success of getting issues heard that may not get discussed and having them respond to issues that may not get discussed. But is running as an independent necessarily it? How can you get into these party machines if you've never had much to do with them in the past?
Yeah, okay, great question.
How do you ever get into these party machines if you've never had much to do with them in the past?
Well, part of the reason that Women for Election is doing what we're doing is because of that reduction in membership and reduction in requirement of people to go to the major parties to learn how to run. A lot of women that do our workshops, do our training events, will eventually then contact a major party. But they don't want their first contact to be with a major party to understand. So if you were going to run 40 years ago, you'd go to your local branch meeting, you'd sign up, you'd find out on the ground how things worked, and you'd go from there. Now, people aren't as interested in nailing their colours to the mast so early right now. Maybe they've got some disenchantment with the major parties, but they want to find out how to run, how to get involved, how to help somebody else run before they make that first move. So that's the gap that we're filling there. Part of the reason that we're doing our In Conversation series with current and retired female politicians is they talk about their journey into politics. I would say more than half of the people that we have interviewed have said, I joined the party within 6 months of running or being pre-selected. Now, often an excuse people will say to us saying, look, I would have loved to run, you know, I'm 45 now, I don't have young kids anymore, but I've never been a member of a party, I've left my run too late. Well, that's just not the way that it operates anymore. It truly isn't. Federal parliamentarians that got in 2019, of all the new ones, half of them joined their party, whether it's the Liberal or Labor, 6 months beforehand.
Okay. Wow.
So, yeah. So, you know, but you don't know what you don't know. This whole process is kept opaque. Okay. So let's make it transparent. When you make it transparent, you make it more accessible. When you make it more accessible, more people want to step forward into the process. Particularly women, I would say, tend to need to have more information before they step forward. It's the same in the corporate world. So we do a lot of work with the major parties. You know, I think we've had some very robust discussions with the major parties, but it's ultimately ended up in them coming to our events, engaging with what we're doing. In our last face-to-face event in Canberra, I had someone from the organisational wing of the Liberal Party and the Labor Party sit on a stool next to each other and each talk about their pre-selection process in front of each other. I don't know if that's happened before, but it's really, really makes the whole process accessible. And then come and prosecute the case at our events, talk about the values of your party and talk about why the women are participating here should call you and not the other person at the end of it. Or maybe women want to run as an independent, but we show what that all looks like and how it changes, the pros and cons of each, and then, you know, go according to your values.
Okay, I want to get to some questions, but before I do, I will go. So if anyone would like to start typing questions, there's been some really good things being mentioned in this debate already, which I'll tap into also, but you might want to start thinking about questions or things that you want to say. I'm not sure, Licia, do you usually turn mics on so people can talk, they say the question direct, or how do you prefer to run?
Yes, mic's on is good as long as they're quick and concise.
But before I do want to ask one, and it's come up from Andrea Christie David, who she was in the session earlier but had to leave. And she asks about women of colour and also Indigenous women. So what are you seeing more women of colour and Indigenous women come to Women for Election, interested in trying to learn more? What can we do to make sure that a diverse range of women actually end up getting pre-selected and ultimately elected?
Yeah, such an important question. We make a concerted effort to do outreach to different women's organisations, including Indigenous and COLD organisations across the country, including LGBTQI women, marginalised and disadvantaged women, because of that lived experience that we want in our parliaments. Like I said before, it's not just about empowering more white women lawyers into parliament. That's not part of the solution. It is the broad breadth of lived experience that is part of the solution. Women for Election has partnered recently with an organisation called Women's Business, and we are writing together at the moment a module called Politics in Colour that we hope we will launch later this year, specifically written to address the barriers that women of colour face when running. Women face more barriers. Women of colour face even a greater number of barriers. So watch this space in terms of rolling that out, but it is such a critical piece of what we are doing. We scholarship tickets to all of our events to enable women from a broad base to attend our events. It's a big differentiator of what we are trying to address. So please, anyone get in touch with us at any point should they want to be scholarshiped into one of our events. At our most recent event, we had a fabulous Indigenous woman coming to us from Cape York, tuning into our event from Cape York. Same from Northern Territory, same from New South Wales. 3 Indigenous women out of 21 women who did our most recent online Equip course. By the way, in that same online course, we had 2 women breastfeeding while taking notes as well. This shows you some of the determination that's happening out in our communities at the moment about trying to understand about this process and how they can get involved as well.
Okay, lots of things coming through. I'd like just to go to how we can engage more young women. This is from Angelina, who notes, so she's got the speech marks of back in my day, but talks about uni campuses had active political groups who then made up some of the pathway to feed into state politics. 5 of the men she went to uni with now in federal or state politics, so that worked out well for them. Are young people engaged? And I mean, I might just answer one thing there, is that I want to preface this by saying I really do believe that young people engage. They might not be necessarily engaged in the channels that we're used to seeing people engaged. But what do you think, Licia?
Yes, absolutely, they're engaged. I mean, school climate strike is a perfect example. So, look, yes, getting young people engaged in the political process, I think, is particularly important. Now, let's take an 18-year-old in Australia right now who's seen 7 different politicians since they were 9. Okay, so in Australia. So that doesn't lend itself to them feeling that our democratic process is as good as it could be. So how they're channeling their political power tends to be more on issues based. So whether that be housing affordability, climate change, university fees, funding, different funding models, first home buyers, marching on Canberra on those different issues. So extraordinarily politically engaged, but not necessarily wanting to move down the political route of running themselves. So part of the outreach that we're doing to a lot of younger organisations across the country is just sowing the seed about what could be possible if just even 10% of those thousands and thousands of young Australians marching on Canberra successfully got elected. What would that look like in terms of the policy change that they so desperately want implemented? So if you're marching on Canberra at the moment and the same faces are looking back at you and you're feeling like you're not getting change on policy, there's a reason why. So let's change the faces.
Would you like to see those young people running sort of, you know, in their early 20s, or what? I mean, what would you advise?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, a lot of the data says that it takes 3 times to run before you have success. That's not gendered either. That's for that's the case for most people. So waiting until you have all the skills before you run, as soon as we just take away the pressure of that, saying, look, well, the data says actually the first time you run, you are not going to win. But run anyway, step forward anyway, learn from the experience. What did you do well? What would you change the next time you run? Treat it as a job interview. Get the knowledge about how, and why not start in your early 20s? What a differentiating factor versus the incumbent that you're probably running against as well. And we've seen these wonderful young mayors, young councillors around the country. Christy McBain, most recently, fabulous, fabulous example of very young councillor, very young mayor, very proudly from our 2018 alumni cohort as well. And now she's sitting in Canberra. She's got 3 young children, but fabulous example of what can be achieved and what you learn along the way, and then how you can convert that when you're in your 30s as well.
I think, like, say with Christy's experience, and you mentioned having the 3 young children, and I think that's a life experience that we do need to have in Canberra at the moment, because we need to have some people who are at that stage at the moment being able to represent the views of so many other people who are at that stage at the moment. At the same time, and I go back, I'm still on the younger people thing, is that I think it's all very well for them to run and get the experience now, but I want to see them in positions of power now, because I think if we're looking at climate change, which is ultimately affecting their future more than anyone else, they're the ones who need to have a say. I go to the COVID commission, which is not a political commission, it was politically appointed, but you look at that COVID commission who are there determining the jobs of the future and whatever else, and have gone for the gas-led recovery. And there's not anyone on that commission under the age of, I don't think there's anyone, I think Paul Howes might be the youngest and he's 38. So there's nobody on there. There's somebody else there who could be 38, 37, I'm not sure. But why don't we have people under 35 representing the things that are there to determine the pieces of the future? It just seems absolutely ridiculous. So I want to see them in there now.
Yeah. Well, look, we all do. So it's about putting themselves forward to be able to be selected in those positions in the first place. And, you know, I certainly believe that there is an absence, and we have advisors, young advisors that help us, that talk about the resilience of younger people and why would you want to put yourself into the cauldron of politics. So, you know, again, I don't want to underplay that element, but resilience is like a muscle. You know, the more you exercise it, the more you flex it, the stronger it gets. And we have so many capable young people in this country that we need to all encourage to consider going into this sector, rather than come at them and say, oh, don't do it, you know, it's so toxic. Why would you ever consider that? Which is often the that's often the rhetoric that first comes at them if they even talk about maybe making that move. So it's incumbent on all of us to support people, change their minds about the impact that they could have by getting involved, and then supporting them when they do step forward as well.
Okay, so I'm seeing a different side of the equation now. This is coming through a lot in the chat. So looking at, and I don't know if you do have breakdown of ages, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to get caught up in age. I just think it's interesting bringing it into people at very different life experiences and what they can bring to the table. And obviously another very essential life experience is for women aged over 50. So I mean, and that's quite, and they bring a different career. They bring so much experience in. And I remember talking to, say, someone like Wendy McCarthy, and you think about just her experience, and she didn't start with her board positions until after she'd had, she was a teacher, she had kids, she was at home with young kids, she got increasingly bored doing that. She went out into a community, she started engaging at the community level. Just this brilliant experience that came out from that led her to do all these amazing things a little bit later on. So what kind of numbers are you seeing? Is there any particular age group that you see are more interested in running for office at the moment? And what would you say to women who are say in that 50 plus age bracket, because that is obviously a perfect opportunity too to get engaged in this?
It's all ages that are getting involved. Honestly, it is all ages. And that's one of the most exciting things for me that gives me the most hope. Older women that don't have young children to look after are certainly heavy involved. I mean, the number one member of Get Up, I think, is women aged 55 and above. These are women that have the time to go out and hit the streets, have extreme world experience, and know how it could be, and are prepared to go out there and make it happen. I remember Karen Phelps in the Wentworth by-election talking about how her wealth of experience, her lived experience, and all the different things that she could tick off that she'd done through her career was such a massive benefit in terms of her campaign. So I think we have to understand the different tiers of government and the different opportunities to put yourself forward. I wouldn't suggest that a 17-year-old put themselves forward first for a federal seat, although, I did it, but I'm not that young. But not to expect to win, but certainly to expect to change the conversation. But the wealth of knowledge, the lived experience that comes from older women, we absolutely want them involved in our political process and to win. And I think a lot, women over the age of 55 right now, women that have young grandchildren, are terrified about the future for their grandchildren versus the life they had or the life their children had. And that is a very big emotive push for more and more women getting involved in improving the political landscape in Australia right now.
Some really good comments coming through on this. Just one just now from Bryony who mentions that just to look at politics in the US, Trump, Biden, Nancy Pelosi, all in their 70s and 80s. I think Ruth McGowan noted Jane Fonda. I love Jane Fonda, so thank you for that. But so Amanda's put it in. Trump is 74, Biden is 77. Kamala Harris, I think, is in her 50s. I'm not sure her exact age. So any other questions? We're getting lots of comments now, so I'm just trying to go through to see what I can share from comments. So that Ruth McGowan noting that Jane Fonda referred to it as the third act, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Alicia here, it's pretty simple. Diversity represents our community and assists in policy and decision making. That is beneficial for all. She had to head off, but that's very true. And we just need more people to recognise that, particularly the people who are in power. Any other questions, or can we bring in somebody else to make a comment, maybe on video? Are we allowed to do that, Amanda?
Look, we can. Yes, I'm sure we're able to do that. I think, and here comes the gendered part about how we view women in politics as well. So Elizabeth Warren, too old to run, younger than Trump, younger than Biden, but definitely, in terms of stamina. Hillary's stamina was mentioned as well. But the part of that is the lack of not seeing women in those positions in the first place. Just like Jacinda being pregnant, and we've got pregnant parliamentarians right now in Australia, the more we see that, the more it's normalised. The more we see young people in our chambers, the more we see people in wheelchairs in our chambers, the more it's all normalised. But culturally, yes, the older politicians in the US, they're quite the anomaly in terms of that. We are not at that stage in Australia just yet, but we're working on it.
I want to see, when you say normalised, I want to see ambition normalised. And because we brought up Kamala Harris, it's one of the things that she was criticised for just prior to her being announced as the Democratic candidate for VP, was that she's too ambitious. And it's just, of course she's ambitious. What else is she there for? But this idea she's too ambitious. Of course, that's the thing. So I love seeing that there and seeing ambitious women who are there. She's there. She can be the next in line to be president, of course. And that's it said that Biden has suggested that he may not run that second term. And that's amazing. It's an incredible result. So we can normalize ambition and stop getting women criticized for being ambitious.
Yeah. That would be. And then let's pivot that into female leadership traits then as well. Ambitious for what? Ambitious for self or ambitious to make it better? And you're allowed to do both, by the way. But the ambition to improve the status quo versus ambition or arrogance or aggressiveness or power hungry, to get there for the sake of getting there. We want more and more and more people involved in the political process because of the outcomes they want to achieve for the community, not because it is the end game. I think that's a big difference in our political landscape over the last quarter of a century, 30 years, is that the moderate person, the person that's had a successful career, that then decides, you know what, I'm going to do my civic duty. I'll give a crack at running, I'll give it 2 terms, and then I'll leave. And I'll return to something because I have something to return to, a career elsewhere. The absence of that has meant what's left is what I call the absolute career politician, somebody that knows nothing else, has never lived a life other than that life. And that creates a very polarized chamber, very adversarial chamber, a non-collaborative chamber. So more and more women getting involved that have done careers elsewhere will only benefit that as well.
All right, so a few more minutes, and I know that we've got a few people in the room here who might be running for an upcoming election or have recently run for office. So if any of you would like to put your hand up and let us know maybe your why and what has been the tipping point for you, because that might be interesting and handy for all of us to know, because it could be the tipping point very much for other women in the near future. So if anyone would like to, put your hand up now, and I'll ask you one more question, Licia, and that's from Kate Hook here, who says that idea of feeling strongly about a particular issue like climate change, do you think it can be a disadvantage to be seen as a single issue if you make it clear what that main issue is?
John Howard famously said that activists make rubbish politicians. I'm not sure I agree. I could understand why you might think that, but I was speaking at an amazing Indigenous women's leadership symposium late last year. All of those women running Indigenous NGOs, fighting for different rights, highly capable, highly intellectual, highly generous and collaborative, but all activists, I would say. They know their topic backwards, and they know what the policy solutions are as well. So don't be afraid. If you are particularly focused on an issue, do not be afraid to step forward and run on that issue. You can build policies external to that around it, but understanding why you're running and what you want to change can be very appealing to those that are going to vote for you. So I would not worry about it being too narrow at all.
Okay. All right. So I don't know if we got any takers, and I'm mindful of putting anyone on the spot. So I don't
see Peter has raised her hand, and I think I saw Pallavi as well.
Okay. Pallavi, you're already on camera. So do you, so I don't think I can, yes, there you go. Hello.
Yeah. Hi everyone. No, thanks for the opportunity. This is a fantastic webinar. Thanks Angela, Licia, everyone involved. As Angela knows, I ran as a New South Wales Liberal upper house candidate in the last state election, 2019. Women's Agenda were really great at also giving me a platform to highlight some of the issues, and I resonate a lot with what you're saying about, you know, having some issues that are really burning and important for you. And some of them, particularly for me, is having so much experience in the area of domestic and family violence and being a very strong advocate in that area and wanting to see the Liberal Party taking more of an interest in that area, especially since COVID-19. I'm sure I don't need to tell everyone here how much more complex it's been for people who are experiencing it and survivors. So that was definitely one of the big areas I wanted to bring in. But of course also the diverse lens. There is no Indian origin Member of Parliament in the New South Wales Parliament for the Liberal Party, and same in federal in terms of fully Indian. Like I was born here, raised here, Australian, but I have Indian migrant parents. Mental health is another big area, and education. So I find that what I'm doing is I have a sort of a public profile that I keep building in that area anyway, because I have a genuine interest in it. A lot of the stuff I do is pro bono, and that is kind of a good leeway. I'll probably be running for local council next year and doing things in the area, in those areas too. So thanks for all your encouragement and support.
Thanks, Pallavi. It's good to see you again from our 2018 conference. Pallavi wrote a wonderful testimonial that's on our website about women for election. So you go, girl, run for council.
Thanks.
And I can see, so Peter has set up now. Peter, I think we did put you on the spot because we were walking around. So.
Oh, that's okay. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Okay, good. I've just on my strange little earphones. I'm not sure about the microphone. So I just want to give a big shout out to Women for Election. I have recently done one of their workshops and it was really fabulous because Ruth really kind of helped me pinpoint the fact that, you know, I'm probably not going to get up the first time, but agitate, and change the conversation, like Licia says. You know, if that's what I accomplished, then it will have been worthwhile. So why I'm running is because, as I said in the chat, you know, we've got 3 male leaders here. They've all been in a party machine since they were 20. Their lived experience of anything is zero, which was really on display yesterday when I was part of the ACCOS Leaders Forum. You know, the Liberal guy who's running here must have been taking empathy advice from ScoMo's advisor, because his response to, you know, homelessness, poverty, you know, issues that women on the ground are dealing with just was not believable. I just didn't feel he had any sense of real kind of connection. So one of the reasons that, well, the main reason I'm winning is that lived experience issue. You know, there's just not enough of it. COVID-19 has really exposed all of those social and community issues that women are dealing with, underfunded, undersupported, you know, constantly knocking at the doors of government because government just doesn't respect that sector. It's a big theme that I've had running through my discussions with a whole bunch of
Oh,
Oh, no. Oh, oh there, yeah. Okay, you're back on, Peter. We just lost you. She's on mute. Okay.
Yes, unmute. Am I unmuted again? Sorry. Anyway, so the lack of respect for all of these amazing organisations that have all the answers, the platforms that they're putting forward to the ACT elections, for the ACT elections, deal with all the issues, but the government just doesn't let them at the table. So my reason for running is to hold the government to account if I get in, is to really be able to bring those issues to the table and make them explain their rationale and make sure that women are at the forefront. The budget was released, there's zero gender lens, there's no gender budgeting apparent. They're not even, you know, women are hardly mentioned. We're just lumped in with all of the other things they've got to deal with. So I suppose I got radicalised by running a women's business organisation here in Canberra, and I was absolutely horrified at the fear of any kind of political engagement, any kind of political expression, any kind of actually standing up against some of these things. All these women, but, you know, the sense of protecting their business interests was so palpable that I realised that it was not somewhere I could do work, that I needed to, you know, come out and get political and actually take that route, which is, you know, it's hard and it's scary, but I'm having an absolute ball.
Oh, that is so good. I'm so glad to hear it, Peter. Now, are you on the hustings right now?
Well, I will be after this. I'm at Narrabundah Shops.
Yeah.
So in my constituency, and look, just, you know, meeting up with these amazing people that run our city. They're my tribe. It's where I want to be. Who knows where this will lead me, but I will, you know, I'm forming relationships and building communities that is just going to be so empowering. And I'd just like to make the point about activism. You know, I'm in the Progressives Party, and I'm still so dismayed that there's this attitude about activism and politics. You can't be both. I totally agree with you, Licia, or whoever said that. I'm not sure if it was Angela. Activists are highly educated about their issues. They come from a stance of values and moral base, and I think that translates very well into creating great policy, you know, in a whole bunch of other areas. And of course, women have had to be activists because we've been knocking on the damn door and nobody will let us in. So we have to go around the side and we have to become advocates, agitators and activists. And so I think there's a massive pool of talent out there for women in politics, in the activists. I'm really keen on setting up some kind of women's union or women's coalition where we actually put activists, advocates and women running for public office together to kind of cross-fertilise. Some women are never going to want to run for politics, and some women are going to rather be elected than be activists. But I think there's a massive alignment, as you mentioned, Alicia, of interest. And I think if we can unlock that, if we can get women to understand that even though their friends might roll their eyeballs about the constant political Facebook posts, they're not alone. They just need to be able to pop their heads up over the fence and see all the women in exactly the same position across the country.
Thanks, Peter. And good luck out on the hustings as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
So exciting to see you run and see and share your experience afterwards as well.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, everyone. It's been fabulous. I love getting together and just the energy, even though it's online, it's palpable.
And now that I'm on gallery view and I can see everyone rather than just myself and you, Ange, I want to do a big shout out to Ruth McGowan, our training partner as well. So Ruth and I have been the ones holding the Equip programs, like the dynamic duo. And Ruth was a councillor, a mayor herself, and played just a little role in getting her sister, Kathy McGowan, elected federally as well. So, Ruth, you're a bloody ripper. All right. So, what time are we at? God, that went so quickly.
We're at 1:01, so I think it's time to wrap up. So I will say thank you, everybody. It's I've had it on the conference view the whole time, so it feels so good to feel this energy. And I think that there is a real benefit in online events. I know that we're all disappointed that we can't get together in person, but this, I feel like I've been able to connect with people in other ways that I haven't previously been able to do, because we're in different cities. Some of us are in lockdown, some of us are not. We're in a bit of a parallel universe at the moment with what's going on in Australia. So this is a great opportunity to come together and see people's faces on an equal footing in that way. So thank you everybody for participating.
Yes, it's been fabulous. Thank you everyone. And from this point, what can you do? Look, be part of our community. Go to the Women for Election Australia website. Understand how you can be part of our community. Sign up for the newsletter. Understand how you can help another woman run. Maybe you don't want to run yourself, but just engaging, being an active citizen is going to make all the difference. So either support another woman to run yourself, or please consider helping us train more women. We have a very big campaign running at the moment, which is to train 2,000 women to run by 2022. And if you can help with a donation to assist us to do that, then we'd be grateful. But let's get going and get more women elected.
2,000 women by 2022. I love it. Thank you.